Hello friends, Sacred Travels, the highlight of my June. I'm a huge advocate of traveling somewhere new at least once per year. More than that, I lead a spiritual life and have been trying to visit sacred places in all 50 states for the past 3 summers. I've driven through many states now, 14 in the Northeast, through the midsection of the US, and haven't quite made it to the West Coast. I typically collect a magnet when I've stopped at a sacred spot, if I can find one, and add it to my refrigerator as a daily reminder of my mission to seek out new and special places in the U.S. and beyond. On my most recent trip, my husband and I headed out to the southwestern U.S. with a focus on the Four Corners area. We always have an idea of areas we'd like to see and usually plan out a rough idea of the places we'll visit and when. But then we leave it up to how we feel, whether we think we can deal with weather conditions, traffic, and if there's a place we can find to camp, and change plans if necessary. This trip was no exception. After we left North Carolina, we headed west. The first night entailed staying at a free campsite not far from Little Rock, Arkansas. On our cross-country travels, we'd actually stayed there before. As we drove into New Mexico, we had our roadmap laid out to go to Chaco Canyon. We decided to avoid going through Albuquerque because of traffic and elected for 2-lane roads. Except we took a particular 2-lane road that turned into a dirt road. The map didn't indicate this. Through high mountains and switchbacks. It ended up taking us about 2 hours longer than usual, but going through Cibola Forest allowed us breathtaking views and we discovered a cave after a short hike. I remember thinking as we entered the cave how it had sort of weird energy. It was still neat to see, but it was as if I could feel the collective energy of the millennia pulled there, and it felt sort of heavy and rather cold. Still, had we stuck to the interstate and a strict schedule, we would never have found this beautiful place. Our next stop was in the desert land of Chaco, a place that makes you earn your stay. You enter a place that's so silent you can almost hear the echoes of voices from a millennia ago. The rock formations reach for the sky, and the dwellings and structures demonstrate human ingenuity at its finest in an era of no advanced or digital technology. The first evening there, I found an overlooked trail. I also discovered a great morning meditation spot. The next day I visited Jungo Pavi, Petroglyphs, and Pueblo Bonito in the morning. In the early afternoon, I then visited Quinquetzo, Pueblo del Arroyo, and Casa Rinconada.
What's amazing about this place is that these folks started construction and continued for 300 years. They had their sacred ceremonies here, they lived here, and they had other regions where they built other complexes. You can feel spirit here. You can feel it in the ravens, the birds, even the little lizards you see crawling by. I'm definitely in a very contemplative mood.
Later in the day, I hiked a trail called Wujiji that took me to another settlement and the opportunity to see some faint images of rock art. Pueblo Bonito, the largest set of ruins, and where most people go, was massive, filled with kivas and various utilitarian rooms. All the while, I kept thinking about why the Chacoans would settle in this high desert and build a trade center there. Because of the size of the settlement and foot traffic, I didn't quite get the spiritual feeling I was looking for. Just before visiting Pueblo Bonito, however, I was able to get some solo time at the Great Kiva at Petroglyphs.
I'm here at Petroglyphs, and this is one of their kivas, and you can sense the sacredness in this place. It's so beautiful, and as you look behind me, just the structures that they have just keep going and going. It's breathtaking and beautiful, starting in the 800s through the 1100s, and they think that people lived here through 1200 AD.
There, I got a special feeling of sacredness. Later in the day, as I walked along the Wujiji Trail in an apparent valley, I would sense that familiar feeling of sacred energy. The sun was setting, and because you cannot get there by car, it is much less traveled. The Chacoans built Wajiji later than Pueblo Bonito. The rockwork was different, but it felt more special somehow than the more traveled areas. Perhaps it was the silence, not even the sound of birds, or the relative remoteness that made it special there. Perhaps it was the pink gold of the setting sun upon the backdrop of rocks, casting a soft light onto the Wajiji Great House. Maybe it was knowing that there was rock art whose face bore witness to the stories of a people who figured out how to survive in a desert landscape so long ago. Whatever it was, I was awed. My next favorite spot was atop the mesa overlooking Pueblo Bonito. I'd arrived there after climbing several hundred feet in a very short span up the Pueblo Alto Trail. I could see Fajada Butte nearby, the Huerfano Mountains in the distance, as well as other landmarks even farther away. These distant places were where the ancient Chacoans could signal their kin to come in from great distances to engage in ceremony and commerce at Pueblo Bonito. After visiting Chaco, we weren't originally going to stand on the corners of 4 states, but it was only 5 miles out of our way. In the end, it was more of a novelty than anything else, but I'm still glad we stopped. Surrounding the spot where Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico intersect are market tables where people set up their crafts and jewelry to sell. I felt closed off to this at first because I hadn't come to stand on the 4 corners to then pick up a touristy souvenir. But then I realized that many of the people who were running the booths were from the nearby Navajo reservation, and I thought it might be good to support their work. I found my magnet signifying my visit to the 4 corners. And then I happened upon a tiny Navajo woman who had what I personally recognized to be wisdom lines on her bronzed face. I made eye contact and she immediately drew me in with a demonstration of her sand painting art. This elder mesmerized my sensibilities in showing me how to create a sand painting. I asked her what she would recommend to someone on a spiritual journey to buy. She guided me to a painting she'd completed and told a story of healing feathers in the 4 cardinal directions, the guiding sun and eagle, and the pollen boy standing in the center. Basically, they are guideposts along the journey, and if I remain true to my heart, I will be guided in the right direction. She wrote the story on the back of the painting and signed her name, Karen Pete. I so wish she had a website so you could see her beautiful paintings, done with such soul and spirit.
I wanted to talk a little bit about letting go of what you think should happen in favor of what actually happens in life. Just learning to go with the flow and learning to let go of expectations, because life ends up getting easier and you never know the possibilities that are going to open up. Right now I'm at a place called Sand Island. It is a recreational area. There is a lot of rafting. This is the San Juan River, and we found it from the road. Originally we were going to stay somewhere else, but something called us here. We saw someone camping and we decided to check it out, and I am so glad we did. Originally we were going to go to Monument Valley, and we would never have found this place because we wouldn't have come this way had we been absolute in sticking to our plans. The heat was part of it. It's really warm this time of year, and we decided to stay a little farther north, even though we were only about 35, maybe 40 miles from Monument Valley. But this place is special. I would actually consider this a sacred place as well. When we got here, we found this beautiful spot. It's in the middle of the desert. You wouldn't necessarily know given the lushness right here down at the river. This was a place of significance for the Ute and the Navajo Native American tribes. There are lots and lots of petroglyphs and other drawings on these rock formations. And actually, as I'm talking, there's a rafting group going by. This is a big hub, who knew, for getting into the river. So you can see the rafting group going by. Yeah, it's just such a special place, and it lent itself to us seeing parts of Utah that we would have never seen. And I think it ended up being a more powerful experience, a more powerful spiritual experience. Can't emphasize enough just being open to life, being open to where it leads you. This area feels incredibly special. There are so many rock formations here and so many places of significance.
I had never before seen such numerous glyphs with cocopellis, spirals, antelope, and even quite alien-looking rock art. Officially, they are between 300 and 3,000 years old, but there is evidence that some of them have been there for over 6,000 years. To have hundreds of these images in proximity to the river means this was a place of significance to whom were probably the Anasazi and also present-day Ute and Navajo nations. I saw Valley of the Gods on my road map, but until I drove through it, I had no idea just how special and incredible it was. The sheer size, variety, scale, and scope of the rock formations left me feeling a little like how you feel when you stand next to a massive building. You realize just how tiny you are. In the eons these rocks have existed, my life is a relative speck on the historical record. It took 250 million years for these rocks to fully form, what with their layers of sandstone, calcium, and siltstone. Over that time, water and wind carved them into the shapes they are now.
Y'all, I'm going through Valley of the Gods right now, and you can kind of see the landscape behind me. It's just so surreal. We are driving along this all-wheel drive road. You can kind of see it here. Just the rock spires and all the scenery. I'm just completely awestruck right now. We have some spiritual meditation music playing in the background, and I am kind of overcome. It's just so incredible. If you ever get the chance to go here, I recommend it. We were going to drive through Monument Valley today, but it's just so hot right now, and coming from Chaco, we thought, let's go somewhere a little bit cooler, camp somewhere a little bit cooler, and then drive through here, and I am so glad we did it. In fact, Monument Valley is about 20 miles from here. I can say that we have seen it. But yeah, this is a spiritual experience, and if you ever get to experience it yourself, you gotta come on over. Bring lots of water.
I felt the zing of sacred energy emanating from this place. It was truly breathtaking in a way that words cannot adequately describe. The landscape was desert red with rock pyres towering and contrasting with the bright blue sky. The shape and layered rock instantly made me marvel at nature's perfect creative work. The dirt road was 17 miles of twists and turns, featuring sagebrush bushes on the ground, juxtaposed against the buttes and pinnacles. It was reminiscent of Monument Valley, which, while we were traveling all around these areas, we could see 20 miles distant. According to the Navajo, these rock formations are power places. With each significant pyre, the Navajo have a legend or a story. Yes, these lands sound silent, but if you listen, you can hear the voices of those who have gone before us. Next on our journey was Bears Ears. Until we had found Sand Island, we didn't know we'd be visiting this special place and knew that our proximity to it meant we had to visit. This area had been in the news in the U.S. because former President Barack Obama designated Bears Ears as a national monument, citing its sacredness and archaeological significance. Nearby Native American communities and tribes celebrated these newly designated 1.35 million acres of land in which they collaborated with the government to acquire. The current president reduced this land area by 85%, opening the pathway for further uranium extraction. Lawsuits are currently in progress to retain the million acres. These lands are still sacred and in use by numerous tribes who need the whole area for their spiritual practices. This area includes places of significance, grave sites, large amounts of archaeological and cultural remains. The roads leading to Bears Ears were knuckle-whitening and jaw-dropping, to say the least. Heading out of Valley of the Gods, you take 261 toward Bears Ears. I have never been on a road quite like that. It effectively switches back and forth up a rock cliff. I don't know what the elevation gain is, but you can gather from the 3D Google image that it's at least several thousand feet. It's a dirt road, no guardrails. If you can brave it, your reward is a view of Valley of the Gods and beyond.
That would be, like a 5,000 foot drop.
After that climb, there's another dirt road climb to get to the base of Bears Ears. It's not as intense, but just as beautiful. The two rock formations really do look like a pair of bare ears. After a second night of camping at Sand Island, we headed to Hovenweep National Monument. This was also one of my favorite places. It wasn't as traveled as Chaco, for example, and featured towers and dwellings along Little Ruin Canyon. You have to hike to these places, and just as well, it helps to keep them preserved. Hovenweep is home to the ancestral Pueblo people. What makes this place unusual and striking is the fact that the structures don't look entirely safe on some of the rocks. They might have interesting shapes or jut out in peculiar patterns. These ancestral people might have been trying to protect their water source or probably tried to stay out of view from neighboring people. After these structures were built in the early 1200s, a severe drought likely hit the area. All over the region, historians surmise that lack of food and water drove different groups to attack each other, and by the late 1200s, the people had abandoned this area. I felt spirit here as well, though. I think it was because I could sense in the silence a vibrant culture that once existed. A lot of thought went into building construction, use of materials, and respect for the environment. This was a place where ancient ceremonies celebrated births, deaths, and life's milestones between. There was another spot on the map to which I can attribute the word incredible. After leaving Hovenweep, it was mid-afternoon. From experience, we knew it was time to figure out where we might camp for the night. If we didn't have a place by early afternoon, it became high priority to find something. We drove along the southern portion of the canyons. The southern part of Sand Canyon trailhead is beautiful, leading to a number of small ruins along the way. It is well traveled and didn't quite call to us. We continued to the eastern part of the monument and found a dirt road to take us deeper into the canyons. On more than one occasion, I was glad we had an all-wheel drive vehicle, and this was one instance. We knew there were some remote campsites atop a cliff overlooking the canyon. The road in was rocky and not well traveled. After 2 miles of creeping along at no more than 5 miles an hour, we summited the cliff and found a camp spot complete with beautiful vistas and landscapes. The only thing I would change is to be able to stay longer than just one night. In the morning, we found a special place called Sand Canyon Pueblo. In the 80s, archaeologists excavated it to study, but then in the 90s they backfilled and preserved it. Though there wasn't much to see above ground, you could still sense the beauty and sacredness of the area. Sand Canyon had once been a hub of activity and just about the same size as renowned dwellings at Mesa Verde. I, for one, am glad they backfilled the Pueblo. It preserves it, yes, but it leaves room for imagination. And because it's not well known, this area, perhaps more than any other I'd encountered on this trip so far, it invited contemplation. Even my partner thought so. We parted ways for much of our tour of the buried Pueblo in favor of walking in silence, taking in the scenery, smelling the subtle scent of sagebrush, and meditating. This was another place where I felt particularly in touch with spirit. Just knowing an awesome place of living, celebrating, and trading was beneath my feet by a people who lived in tandem with the earth and the elements made my heart smile.
Of the journey so far, I would also say that this is one of my favorite places. Actually, every area that we've visited has been really incredible. What makes them favorite to me, though, is when they're less traveled, when they're not so populated with modern people looking at them. And it's not a bad thing when that happens, but there's just something more natural and something more sacred when a land is left undisturbed and people can come in reverent silence and hike around and walk and pay their respects, almost like going to nature church, you know? And so that's part of why I think I like this area so much, is because you can feel the energy here still. You can feel the sacredness. Unlike when I was in Chaco, it was sacred, it was incredible, and it was beautiful. But because there were so many people around, it made it a little bit harder to feel really centered and spiritual. Perhaps because there's so many other energies in the area, you know, with so many other people and pets and cars and lots of modern things, it's harder to be more spiritual feeling, I think. But here, it's off the beaten path, and you kind of have to work to get in here. The reward is that you get to a sacred space that immediately centers you and just prepares you for life, for life's ups and downs.
Again, I could almost hear the echoes of their laughs, their whispers of dreams, their connections to the environment, the wisdom passed down through oral stories and art. I went within to find my own breath and listen to the spirits. We hiked around Sand Canyon before continuing on through to Durango, Colorado, and onto a place near Chimney Rock, where we found another camp spot along the Piedra River. All the rivers we'd seen were at capacity with choppy waters. Again, it made me think how water is life, and yet it's also so powerful in its persistence at carving canyons. We were able to see Chimney Rock from a distance. Park officials only allowed guided tours to the top. I understood why. You reduce the impact of human activity, reduce erosion, and you get a great history lesson. Alas, we didn't have time to do this, and so admired the rock, the unseen dwellings, kivas, and rooms at the top, from the ground. The next leg of our trip took us to visit family. They also live in a sacred place, in Manitou Springs, very close to Garden of the Gods. In another post, I'll report more about those places. In the meantime, I'm planning our next road trip to find more sacred places, possibly going toward Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, and Washington.